In the heart of a quiet American town stood Willow Creek High, a school that had served generations of students. But beneath its reputation for academic excellence lurked an unsettling history. Whispers of strange occurrences, mysterious disappearances, and a tragedy that took place 2 decades ago painted the school with an aura of foreboding. Many dismissed the stories as mere urban legends, but the truth was far darker than anyone could imagine. Ethan, a 16-year-old boy known for his curiosity and tendency to wander off. Ethan was no ordinary teenager. At 16, his curiosity was both his gift and his curse. Always eager to explore, he often found himself in places he wasn't supposed to be. His teachers described him as inquisitive, while his friends teased him for being a daydreamer. But it was this same curiosity that would soon lead him into a situation far beyond his imagination, testing his courage like never before. The final school bell echoed through the halls as students eagerly packed their bags and headed home. The building, once alive with chatter and footsteps, began to empty. Ethan, engrossed in a book, had drifted off to sleep in the corner of the library. As the caretaker made his rounds, locking doors and shutting off lights, he failed to notice the lone student hidden among the shelves. By nightfall, the school was sealed, with Ethan still inside. Ethan stirred, rubbing his eyes as he sat up. The library was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. A sense of unease crept over him as he realized the bustling school he had fallen asleep in was now eerily silent. The ticking of the clock seemed deafening in the stillness, and with every shadow that flickered in the corners, a growing sense of isolation took hold. At first, the silence seemed peaceful, but it didn't last. Ethan froze when he heard the faintest whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. Then came the distant sound of footsteps, deliberate and measured, echoing down the empty corridors. Just as his heart began to race, a chilling screech reverberated through the air, the unmistakable sound of chalk scraping against a blackboard. Each noise seemed to pull him deeper into a nightmare. Ethan shook his head, trying to convince himself that the sounds were nothing but tricks played by his tired mind. "It's just the building settling," he whispered to himself. But the whispers grew clearer, almost as if they were speaking his name. The footsteps no longer echoed distantly, they were right outside the library. With each passing second, his unease turned to outright fear, and he realized this was no figment of his imagination. Desperation overtook Ethan as he bolted toward the nearest exit. He pushed against the heavy doors, but they wouldn't budge. He ran to another, yanking at the handle with all his strength, but it too was locked. His breath came in short, panicked gasps as he darted down the hallways, trying every door he could find. Trapped and terrified, Ethan realized he was completely alone in the school, with something he couldn't explain. Back at home, Ethan's parents, Susan and Tom, glanced at the clock. It was well past his usual time to return. At first, they assumed he was simply running late, perhaps caught up with a friend. But as minutes turned into hours, their concern began to grow. They called his phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail, heightening their unease. Something wasn't right, and they could feel it. Worried, Susan picked up the phone and began calling Ethan's closest friends. "Have you seen Ethan?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Each friend gave the same answer: none of them had seen him since school let out. The answers only deepened their fears, leaving them with more questions than answers. Tom paced the room, trying to figure out what could have happened, and Susan clung to the hope that Ethan would walk through the door any moment. Unable to sit idly by, Susan and Tom decided to drive to Willow Creek High. As they approached, the school loomed eerily in the moonlight. They parked and approached the gates, calling out for Ethan, but their voices echoed into the stillness. Peering through the windows, they saw nothing but darkness. The school appeared lifeless, but in their hearts, they knew something was wrong. Susan's hands trembled as she gripped Tom's arm, whispering, "Where is he?" Desperation led them to the local police station, where they explained their fears to the officer on duty. But the officer, used to teenagers staying out late, dismissed their concerns with a shrug. "He's probably at a friend's house," the officer said. "Kids do this all the time." Despite their protests, the officer refused to take immediate action, leaving Susan and Tom feeling helpless and frustrated as the night dragged on. With no other options, Susan and Tom returned home, though neither could sleep. Every creak of the house, every distant sound outside, made them jump. They sat in the living room, the hours stretching endlessly, consumed by fear and guilt. "What if something's happened to him?" Susan whispered, tears streaming down her face. Tom tried to stay strong, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on his chest. As Ethan cautiously explored the dimly lit corridors, something caught the corner of his eye, a fleeting shadow moving unnaturally fast. His heart pounded as he turned, only to see nothing. A few steps later, it happened again, but this time he saw her, a woman in a torn, dusty teacher's outfit, her face pale and eyes hollow. She appeared for only a moment before vanishing, leaving behind an oppressive chill in the air. The school seemed alive with malevolent energy. As Ethan passed the library, books toppled from shelves without warning, landing with a loud thud. Doors slammed shut with deafening force behind him, trapping him momentarily in the hallways. Then, in a classroom, his blood ran cold as he saw the words "Help Me" scrawled on a blackboard in chalk, the letters appearing one by one as if an invisible hand was writing them. Ethan's confusion deepened as he began to hear whispers that seemed to form words. The voice was faint yet distinct, repeatedly saying, "Eleanor Gray." He began to piece together fragmented visions, an image of a kind-faced teacher standing in front of a classroom, followed by scenes of anguish and despair. The whispers grew louder, filled with sorrow, until Ethan finally understood. The ghost was revealing her name and her story. She was Ms. Eleanor Gray. Ethan was bombarded with horrifying visions. He saw a younger Ms. Gray being cornered by Principal Harris, her cries for help ignored. Through eerie whispers, he learned that Harris, a man of power, had assaulted her and then used his influence to ruin her reputation. Another vision showed Ms. Gray alone in her classroom, tears streaming down her face. Broken and abandoned, she tied a rope to a ceiling beam and ended her life. The image burned into Ethan's mind, filling him with sorrow and anger. The final revelation showed newspaper clippings, headlines reading, "Beloved Teacher Takes Own Life," and whispers among students about her ghost haunting the halls. Her death was a tragedy shrouded in lies, and her spirit had been trapped in the school ever since. Exhausted but resolute, Susan and Tom arrived at Willow Creek High just as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the building. They had persuaded a skeptical police officer to join them. The officer, clearly uninterested, muttered about wasted time, but Susan's desperate pleas had convinced him. Together, they stood outside the locked gates, hoping to find any sign of Ethan. The officer hesitated, pointing out that the school wouldn't officially open for hours. But Susan and Tom were unrelenting. "Our son is in there," Susan cried. Her determination, paired with Tom's quiet yet forceful insistence, left the officer no choice. He radioed for the caretaker, who arrived shortly after with a set of jangling keys, begrudgingly unlocking the school doors. While Ethan's parents waited anxiously outside, Ethan remained trapped inside, his nightmare far from over. Ms. Gray's ghost grew more aggressive, appearing suddenly, her anguished face inches from his own. Desks scraped across the floor on their own, blocking his path.
"You can't leave!"
Her voice boomed, echoing off the walls. Ethan's determination wavered as he realized she wasn't ready to let him go. One moment, Ms. Gray's ghost appeared vulnerable, whispering,
"Help me, please!"
In the next, her sorrow transformed into fury, her eyes blazing as she screamed.
"You'll suffer like I did!"
Her duality left Ethan torn between sympathy and terror. He realized her spirit was fractured, part of her sought justice, while another part was consumed by rage, blaming the living for her untimely demise. After endless wandering, Ethan stumbled upon a door unlike the others. It was covered in dust and rusted chains, clearly untouched for years. As he approached, the air grew heavier, and Ms. Gray's voice whispered, "The truth lies here." Summoning his courage, Ethan pried the door open with a crowbar he had found, stepping into the room where her life had ended. The room was a time capsule, with Ms. Gray's belongings still intact. On the desk lay a worn diary. As Ethan flipped through the pages, his heart broke. The entries detailed her joy in teaching, followed by her growing fear of Principal Harris. The final entry, written in shaky handwriting, was a haunting farewell, pleading for someone to remember her story and seek justice. Just as Ethan absorbed the full weight of Ms. Gray's story, her ghost materialized, more enraged than ever. She screamed, her presence shaking the room as objects flew toward him. Ethan barely avoided being struck as he clutched the diary. In his frantic escape, he stumbled upon the caretaker's set of keys and, with trembling hands, unlocked the main doors, bursting into the fresh morning air. As Ethan burst through the school's front doors, disheveled and terrified, he collapsed onto the pavement. His parents rushed toward him, their relief turning to alarm as they saw his pale face and trembling hands clutching the diary. Susan pulled him into her arms, while Tom demanded to know what had happened. The police officer, skeptical of Ethan's wild story, stepped forward to assess the situation. Ethan, still gasping for air, whispered,
"Miss Gray, she's still in there. She needs help."
His parents exchanged worried glances, unsure if their son was delirious or genuinely recounting something supernatural. Ethan held up the diary, pleading,
"This proves it. She's real. She was wronged."
Determined to verify Ethan's claims, the officer and the caretaker led the group inside. They searched room by room, but everything appeared normal, no signs of the ghost, the scrawled chalk messages, or the disturbances Ethan described. Even the locked room where Ms. Gray had died looked untouched, though Ethan insisted it had been open. The caretaker dismissed the diary as an old relic, further casting doubt on Ethan's story. Back home, Ethan refused to let Ms. Gray's memory fade into obscurity. He showed the diary to his parents, reading aloud the heart-wrenching entries. Susan, initially skeptical, was moved to tears, while Tom grew visibly angry at the injustice. Together, they resolved to bring Ms. Gray's story to light, even if others dismissed it as a ghost story. Ethan's parents contacted local reporters and historians, presenting the diary as evidence. As journalists dug deeper, they unearthed buried scandals involving Principal Harris. To their shock, they discovered that a current member of the school board was Harris's nephew, who had worked to suppress rumors and keep the school's dark past hidden. The community was divided. Some believed Ethan's story and demanded accountability, while others dismissed it as a teenager's overactive imagination. Ethan endured ridicule at school, but his resolve only strengthened.
"This isn't just about me,"
he told his parents.
"It's about justice for Miss Gray."
Ethan spent hours in the library and online, combing through old records and articles. He uncovered unsettling patterns. Over the years, several unexplained accidents and incidents had occurred in the school, all tied to the same hallway where Ms. Gray had died. Students had reported seeing shadows, hearing whispers, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. One night, as Ethan drifted off to sleep, he found himself back in the school hallway in his dreams. Ms. Gray's ghost appeared before him, her expression softer yet still haunting.
You've done well.
She whispered, her voice echoing in the void.
But this is far from over.
Ethan jolted awake, his heart racing. He realized her warning wasn't just about her story, it was about the lingering darkness at Willow Creek High. The diary became a symbol of truth, sparking debates and investigations into the school's history. Ethan, forever changed by the experience, vowed to keep fighting for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the school's secrets ran deeper than anyone imagined.